Good evening, everyone. I trust you're well, and I trust you're all sitting comfortably and that the weather's been good to you today. Hope you've got some refreshments together for the webinar this evening. Welcome to our ForFarmers Always Robot Ready webinar. My name's Greg Edwards, and I head up our robot team in the UK. Some of you may know me more locally as well as the Portbury team sales manager. I'm pleased to say this evening I'm joined by my two esteemed colleagues, Alison Ewing and Philip Ambler. Alison is our National Technical Manager and Philip is our National Technical Lead in our robot team. So both Philip and Alison work alongside and closely with our customer base and closely with the robots that they utilise as well. So the main aim that Alison and Philip have is to meet the farm's goals and aspirations through a simple mantra, which is delivering solid nutritional advice and good robotic guidance. So you'll be hearing some more from Alison and Philip very shortly. This evening, this webinar and their content is going to focus on three key areas. The first one being what are the drivers in profitability when it comes to robotic milking. The second being how can we increase robot efficiency and thus drive profitability. And finally, what is the true value of managing and utilising the data that a robot produces. Now, before we go any further, just to make you aware, there is a small question mark in the top right-hand corner of your screens, or at least there should be. And if you click on that at any point this evening, you'll be able to type a question in and that will come through to us. And time forbidding, at the end of the webinar, we'll try and get through those questions that you have as we go along as well. So before we get stuck into the good stuff, just a couple of questions really, a couple of questions to try and get to know our audience a bit better. So I'm going to put a poll up on the screen and you're going to have a number of options to choose from. So the first question that I'm going to pose to you is how long have you been milking with robots? And that poll should be up on the screen now. If I could ask you all to take some time to choose an option there. The options you've got are you're considering going into it, 0 to 1 years, 1 to 3 years, or 3 years plus. And I can see the votes coming in as we speak. I'll give it a few more seconds. We're up to 50% of the audience having voted. Just give it a bit more time. Okay, and I'll close the poll there. And I'll share with you the results of that. Okay, so hopefully you can see on your screen there that there's 44% of the audience considering going into robotics. We've got 15% that have been in robotic milking 0 to 1 years, 10% 1 to 3 years, and 31% 3 year plus. So the main split is there between those people considering coming in and people that have been in the robotic milking field for 3 years plus. So thank you, some good insight there. I will now just try and launch my second one. Okay, and this question is which robotic milking system do you use? 5 options on there. I hope we haven't missed any manufacturer off, but I'm sure you'll soon let me know if we have. Results are coming through. We've got 40% of the audience having made their selection. I'll give it a bit longer. Okay, I think we're there. I will close that now. And again, share with you the results. So quite a lately dominated audience, but a decent representation from Forward as well, a few on GEA, and then a small split between Delaval and Bomatic. So what I think that shows is that we have a very varied audience this evening, an audience that is thinking about going into robotics, but also some that have quite some experience. So at whichever stage you're at and whichever system you're using, I hope this evening you're able to take something away with you. So where are we up to with robotic milking in the UK? Well, robotic milking systems first became commercially available in the 1990s, but it wasn't until the early 2000s that their popularity really began to increase, and you probably don't need me to tell you that. The popularity continued to grow though through the 2010s, and most recently we've seen a surge in robotics after the 2019 government grant funding that came through. It's now estimated there are around 1,000 robotic farms, probably more, in the UK, and that 1 in 3 of those farms, or 1 in 3 farms now looking to reinvest in their milking system, are considering robotic as an option. And I think that came through in our results there as well. So to pose a question then, why is it that we still see some robotic milking units being removed from farm? And more importantly, what does it take to operate a robotic milking system successfully and profitably? And at this point, I'm going to hand over to my colleague, Philip. Philip, I believe the controls are with you now.
Thank you very much, Greg. Thank you very much for the introduction. Good evening, everyone. So in essence, I suppose the question I'd like to pose is, are you getting the most out of your robots? And before we kick off, I suppose I should just sort of add one caveat to that I'm sure as we go through the next 20 minutes, there will be things that some of you will agree with. There will certainly be things that some of you won't agree with. But it's not intended as being a blueprint. As I think we all appreciate, it's not just as simple a case as adopting a set of settings and everything's perfect. So the whole premise behind what I want to cover over the next 20 minutes is sort of to certainly stimulate thinking, potentially stimulate debate, and for us to sometimes question the things we do, why we do them, and what the outcomes of those are likely to be. So I just wanted to pause a bit of a statement. So when I say most people in agriculture underestimate the genetic potential of the dairy cow, I don't just necessarily mean just in terms of the litres she's capable of producing, but actually her as an individual and her ability to not only produce milk, but to get back in calf, to look after herself, and crucially, to do all of those things despite sometimes the barriers we inadvertently put in place or put in front of her unknowingly, that to a lesser or greater degree prevent her from expressing her natural potential. So it's really just to get us thinking about that. So what has changed over the last 60 years? Well, certainly with the investment in genetics, we've seen a massive explosion in the genetic potential of the animals that we see on farm. The other elements have been, yes, certainly as you can see from the pictures, changes in terms of infrastructure, the employment of technology, better housing, better feeding, massive strides forwards, a lot of which has been research and both in institutions and also commercial research on farm as well. But with that has come an increasing number of headaches. So when I say, what are you managing? What I'm trying to illustrate in terms of now is that we're dealing with quite complex businesses. So yes, we're within agriculture, but in essence, we're dealing with a manufacturing and processing business. And all of those different elements that feed into what we hope to achieve or what we aspire to achieve in that bottom right-hand corner in terms of our return on our investment. But we're dealing not only with land, we've got to now have people management skills in terms of looking in terms of feed utilisation and managing the herd. We're trying to manage the cow and her genetic potential. We've then got, depending where we're in the country, greater or lesser degree in terms of effluent management and all the constraints that puts on us. As well as you can see on the bottom line, the ones that immediately spring to mind, labour costs, feed costs, and crucially milk income as well. So on a day-to-day basis, we've got a massive amount of information that we're asked to look at, to digest, and to come up with solutions to in terms of how we're managing our businesses. So the one thing we're not short of is stress, and we're certainly not short of information. But if we try to distill that down into a more manageable format, then in essence, I guess I can simplify it into 3 key areas. So management, I mean, that covers an absolute plethora of different areas. We've then got the robot settings, and then we've got the feed and the health of the animal. And as you can see where those dark lines and where they intersect are, that in essence is trying to illustrate in terms of how each of those key areas actually overlap. So we may do certain things from a management perspective that will have a knock-on effect in terms of the feeding or the health of the animal. And also, conversely, that will affect the robot settings we've currently got or robot settings that we're looking at changing. And what we aim for is that absolute sweet spot in the centre where we can bring all of those things together. And at the centre of that, and the most important element, is a cow itself. So in terms of the key drivers with regards to robot efficiency and with that profitability, so we have balanced nutrition, we have the hoof, the udder health, we have transition cow management, we have some elements that robot settings, so in terms of the number of visits and milking frequency, grouping of animals, how much free time we have, and those are all encompassed then under the robot settings. We've then got other factors, so the number of litres we produce per robot, the feed and the access type we have. So out of all of those, over the next 18 minutes or so, we'll be looking in a little bit more detail, particularly around balanced nutrition, the importance of hoof and udder health, how crucial transition cow management is, and also just delving into some of the robot settings as well. So trying to put all of that into some form of context. So on the left-hand side, in essence, we have the cow in terms of her genetic level and the milk use she's likely to produce. So that is very much predetermined. So what we do to the right of that will determine whether that animal is able to express their natural potential and deliver that. So obviously the importance of nutrition, both in terms of the healthiness, in terms of milk yield, in terms of the number of visits that she's going to make to the robot, and also in fact impacting on that is cow comfort. So is the environment right? If the environment's right, then that helps with the healthiness of the animal, and that helps with their intake and the nutrition. So we have there where it says milking cows, in essence the robot, and the things that are delivering into that are influencing and impacting on the efficiency of the robot. Certainly the access matrix we have set up in terms of robot settings, the cow itself, the percentage of free time we're allowing, the level of occupancy of that robot, so the number of cows we put on that robot, feed, both in terms of type of feed, the feeding time and the frequency of feeding. So each of those we're trying to deal with on a day-to-day basis and understand with the aim of allowing that animal or those animals that are going through that particular robot to maximize their potential. So wherever we've got barriers at each of those points or we've got blockers, the key really is to understand what the blockers are and to the best of our ability remove them or mitigate them within the constraints of the system that we're working with. And as it says there, really it's all about trying to strike that balance. So when I sort of describe it as hitting that sweet spot, it's not that we're perfect in each of those key areas by any means, but what we've managed to do is, to the best of our ability, is optimize each of those areas given the constraints that we have to deal with. And probably one of the biggest ones we do tend to find is that certainly we're never short of information. So as we go through, it's trying to understand those pieces of information that are relevant and crucially are important in terms of understanding what the cow is then trying to tell us. So how we take that information and we we put it into practical reality on farm that then delivers the results. So one thing I always think about when I'm walking around a farm or when I'm talking to farmers is that actually the most important person is the cow. And what do I mean by that in terms of, well, actually, the cows have got an amazing ability to, as I say, produce litres, get in calf, look after themselves, despite sometimes the barriers that inadvertently get put in front of them. So if we can understand what she's telling us, and I don't mean that in terms of understanding cow's language, but in terms of how she behaves, how she responds to certain things, what her performance is, then over time we get a better understanding of actually what's preventing her from actually displaying, or more importantly, creating, allowing her to express that natural potential. And I guess it's about understanding who's in charge. In essence, she's in charge. So if I can provide her with the freedom to be milked when she wants, then the chances are she's going to be able to produce more milk. And that's the thing with robotic systems, that in essence, the robotic milking system automates all milking functions. So including bringing cows into the milking parlour. But the emphasis of that is that they have to be motivated to go to be milked. And for that, we need not only healthy cows, but we actually need happy cows as well. So again, back to that understanding of what she's requiring and how best we can provide her with that, and she will respond. And cows are amazingly good at telling us what they want. Sometimes we might not always be in the mood to listen or to understand, but actually if we do take the time, then as we all know, whether it's food, air, whether it's comfort, cubicles, whether she's going to have space, whether there's sufficient lighting and the lighting's of the right type, access to clean, fresh water, all of those things we're aware of. But sometimes it will be a case of understanding which is the most limiting factor. And quite often, the cow is the one that's actually telling us that. So if I was to sort of suggest that the key to measuring a profitable and sustainable milk production in a robotic milking system is feed conversion efficiency. So why would I suggest that? Well, in essence, there's a strong correlation between feed conversion efficiency and rumen efficiency. So I can have the best environment, I can have the most perfect robot settings, I can have the best ration, quality forage. But if there's something else that's limiting in that system, then those animals are not going to be able to convert the feed as efficiently as they could do. And if we were to put a financial element to that, if I've got an average feed conversion efficiency of 1.3, then in essence, I've only got 50% utilisation within my rumen. But if I can move her from 1.3 to 1.4, so I'm only really lifting rumen efficiency from 50 to 60%, then on the average UK unit, that's probably worth the best part of 2p a litre on every litre I send out the farm gate. So it's crucially important, and it's a good measure as to all of those different elements that we have to deal with, as to just get a quick overview as to where we are, and potentially, more importantly, where the cow is and what the cow is telling us. So then it's understanding how do we improve the rumen efficiency, and that's not just nutritional, but all the other ones we'll be looking at, that's going to give me that lift in feed conversion efficiency. So some of the things that influence that, obviously the formulation of the diet. So if I've not got the formulation right, or the forage quality isn't right, then in essence, cows are not going to perform. Equally, I can have stage 1 right, but if I haven't communicated that to the person that's feeding the loader wagon or doing the feeding, and we have inaccuracies in terms of loading accuracy, then again, cows aren't going to perform. I've got one ration that I formulated. Quite often, I've got the second ration that the cows actually eat. And equally so with ration preparation. So if it's undermixed, overmixed, if the dry matters are too high, or if the dry matters are too low, again, cows aren't going to perform. And the same again with cow behaviour. So if there's something in the environment that's a limiting factor or an issue, then again, cows aren't going to perform. And the goal, or the holy grail, is that element of number 5, isn't it? So in terms of optimising rumen performance, so if we're thinking in terms of feed efficiency, and with that, we get optimal animal performance. And the combination of those two factors is what drives the financial returns that we're all working towards. So on paper, yeah, sounds fairly easy to achieve. Actual reality is sometimes somewhat different. And it is a challenge, but as with all challenges, there are opportunities. So when we're looking in terms of with our rationing system, so with OptiFeed, the one thing allows us to do is not only look at the average cow, but look at groups of cows by stage of lactation or individual animals within the herd, so we can see the impact of some of these elements. So if we talk about forage quality, level of protein, rumen health, somatic cell count, body condition, milk yield and quality, or my days in milk, and even some of my environmental factors, we now have the ability to actually see what the impact is of those on, in essence, trying to achieve that number 5, the optimal rumen and animal performance. So it's about taking each of those and understanding then as to what the barriers are in place and removing them. And the difficulty with, or one of the biggest challenges is that with robotic milking, is that everything is in essence under a magnifying glass. So it's magnified so many more times. So the management of cow really should be focused on optimizing the rumen health. So that, looking in terms of when we're saying with OptiFeed, is one of the key areas is how balanced my rumen is. So my acidosis and my rumination index. So I'm looking to have that perfect balance as much as possible in the cow's rumen. And equally important, hoof health and lameness. I mean, it's essential that foot trimming, foot baths, that a cow's not only got good healthy feet, because that will maximize the number of times she's potentially going to visit the robot, or the maximum number of times she's going to potentially visit the feed bunker, the feed trough. If she can't walk, or if she finds walking painful, she isn't going to walk very far. And the same with other health. So in terms of depth, conformation and teat placement, keeping hair trim for better laser location. So again, some areas whereby from a robot perspective, you'd almost say some basic attention to detail. Probably one of the biggest areas, or one of the biggest opportunities, is in that transition period. So when we transition the cow from the dry period into the milking herd, I would say it's critically important. It's where, in essence, it's won and lost. So if I don't get the transition right, regardless of how good my forage is, how good my diet is, how consistent my diet is, or how good my robot settings are, or how good my environment and my cubicles are, I'm always going to be struggling because I've already predetermined what she's going to do in that lactation. So if we look at robot visits, I mean, in essence, cows are attracted by the concentrates, not the physical operation of milking. So obviously, an early lactation animal is going to be hungrier, so he's going to want to visit more often. And equally so, later lactation cows, less so, and so getting less concentrate. So some of the key things is to allow them, if they want to visit, is an essential requirement for frequent visits. So removing any obstructions, avoiding any slippery floors, keeping a significant open space in front of the robot, and avoiding holding areas. So we should really be looking for a minimum of 10% free time. The optimum, I would say, is probably in the region of about 15%. If we've got less than 10% free time, then in essence what we are doing is reducing the number of milkings per animal. So we've inadvertently, not consciously, put a barrier in place that's possibly then not allowing those groups of animals to express their natural behaviour. and access to feed. So no feed or lack of feed will mean cows are not encouraged to get up, either to go to the robots or the feed bunker. As a result, the number of milkings will fall. We see that then in terms of litres dropping, and we might start to see a rise in free time. So to give us some degree of flexibility, really we need to feed two concentrates through a robot. One, low protein, high energy, particularly targeted for those early lactation animals. Another one, high protein, slightly lower or the same energy for those in later lactation, so that we maintain that persistency of production. And in an ideal world, we probably have access to a liquid feed dispensing option, so that as much as possible, those in that first 40-60 days in milk, we can mitigate that negative energy balance as much as possible. So with regards to milking frequency, I'm sure if you Google it, it comes up that the average recommendation usually is 2.5 plus per day. But if we break that down and look just behind that headline figure or key performance indicator, however you wish to describe it, then really we're looking for 3.5 in that first 40 days, partly on the basis in terms of trying to control weight loss, and also in terms of getting them to peak and how long we hold those peaks as well. So then sort of day 50 onwards, we're looking to slightly increase that to 4.5. So then we're moving into more of a maximising that yield phase. So in the second half of a lactation, we would be around that 2.5. And in later lactation, so 200 days plus, we'd settle for around 2. And a good indicator, as the picture shows, if we've got good cow flow in and out of the robots, then in essence, refusals should be greater than 1 on average as an indicator. Failure-wise, well, really we should be less than 5 per robot. Certainly more frequent milking means better udder health. However, it does require uniform milking intervals. So if we're less than 2.2, that's indicating that we've got some issue. So for some reason, we're getting irregular milking intervals. And with that, correspondingly, we get lower yields. So that's not milk that's disappearing necessarily as such. It's also milk that potentially those animals should have been producing, but they're not. So they're not expressing that natural potential. And if we look at long intervals, so that's anything up to about 14 hours between milkings, then certainly the resistance to infection declines quite rapidly. Equally though, short intervals, so 6 hours or less, then potentially we do risk teat tissue damage because there isn't sufficient time between milkings for it to recover sufficiently. And with that comes an increased risk of increased somatic cell counts or mastitis. So health issues. And if we talk about production per robot, so economically, the more milk we put through a robot, or the more milk a robot can harvest, the better, because it lowers the investment cost. But as it says, it's how we achieve that. So if it's because we've got too many cows on a robot, then potentially that means that we're going to have more cows on the red list, so more cows we've got to fetch. So not only is there a cost and an inefficiency to that, cows don't like us being in their space, do they? So, you know, cows would prefer it if we kept at least 1.5 meters distance from them. So milking intervals will also be irregular. Some cows will have to wait longer and more often. So if they're stood waiting to be milked, then they're not lying down, or they're not at the feed fence eating. And if they're not lying down, they're not ruminating efficiently, and they're spending too much time stood on the feet. And equally, timid cows and heifers potentially will not visit if there's groups of more dominant cows waiting for the robot. So all of these factors as well can create that reduced yield, reduced output. So typically we will see quoted 55 to 60 cows per robot. And as I've mentioned on a couple of occasions already, free time. So why is free time important? Well, in essence, because it impacts, and as it says, it affects quite a lot of other parameters within the robot settings. So what it tells us is actually how busy the robot is. Now, for some, it's described as free time. For others, they describe it as waste time. And it is a case of just digging down and seeing what actually those timings do actually involve. So some will include the wash downs and some won't. But in essence, we're looking for a minimum of 10%. So that allows us 2.5 hours in any 24-hour period when the robot's able to perform its wash down routines and is not milking. Ideally, we probably want to be at 15%. If we're less than 10%, then we do know we're going to get a decrease in milkings per cow. So immediately we've got a blocker that we've inadvertently put in front of her. We're going to get an increase in the variation in milking intervals, and the negative effects we've just covered that also creates. And we're also going to get an increase in the number of cows requiring collection. So we've got a greater degree of human interaction with cows. We've got another job to do, and we're forcing the cows to do something against what is their natural preference. So as I said before, it could be depending on your spread of your herd, the milking speeds of your herd, other criteria that you possibly might be looking at a maximum of 60 per robot. Or should we actually be looking that actually each robot should be capable of harvesting within a 24-hour period 2,000 plus kilos of milk. So it's how we then would achieve that. So one thing with regards to grouping and also out of parlour feeders, we'd always advocate the use or the employment of out of parlour feeders that give us such a greater degree of flexibility in terms of not only feeding the cow, but meeting her nutritional requirements as well as her behavioural requirements. So if we look over the water to our Dutch colleagues, 80% of Dutch robotic units will have out of parlour feeders in there. And they see it as an opportunity to maximise, certainly in early lactation, how they feed those cows. So certainly where we would employ them, so if we were feeding more than 9 kilograms a day through the robot, certainly out of parlour feeders would be an absolute must. Certainly that, as it says, in that first 120 days. After that, they then become more reliant on the concentrate in the robot. Otherwise, in essence, the number of milkings will start to fall as they're getting too much concentrate outside of the robot. And when it says it's not recommended that we move between different groups, for several reasons. If we're moving cows between groups, not only does it cause a drop in visits, so that's the thing that we actually see, we may also potentially see a drop in litres, but in essence, cows work in social group numbers and standing. So it's not just the impact on that one cow, it's the group we've moved that cow out of and the group that we move the cow into. So while we may actually physically see a reduction in the number of visits or a slight drop in litres, actually it's the potential litres that we've foregone because of how we've changed that hierarchy within those groups. And that can be as much, potentially up to 2 litres. So it's milk we're not necessarily seeing, it's milk that we're not actually harvesting because of something that we've done from a management perspective. So if I was to try and sort of bring all of that together in respect of trying to understand those key parameters and in essence what drives that financial success. So and these are in a ranking order. So I said the first one really is that you've really got to enjoy working with cows. I think it's fair to say for all of us, not just for myself and my colleagues, but for every farmer that I've ever met throughout my career, they do what they do because they really enjoy working with cows. So you need to have that mindset. Another key element, we have to have an excellent transition system and program in place. It doesn't always have to be the most complex. Sometimes the simplest systems work the best. But again, it's attention to detail. If I can transition that cow from her dry period into the milking herd, and I've done it well, and she will tell me if I've got it right or wrong, then that gives me the best opportunity from everything I do from that point onwards that will allow her to express her natural potential. So I've not created a glass ceiling before I've even begun. And it goes without saying, producing high quality, consistent forage. It forms a bedrock of all the diets. So if you can get that right, it's a significant nutritional foundation, be it chemical or physical. Again, something else that is attention to detail. Excellent feeding and trough management. So as illustrated earlier on, the ability to turn a diet on paper into reality down a trough and consistently do it day in, day out, and how that trough's managed, and understanding that when there are variances, and it can be as we go across clamp face, forage dry matters, that we understand those factors and what that means in terms of then intakes, and we adjust accordingly. So we're always looking for a cause and an effect in order to put a mitigation in there to prevent it having a negative impact on the animal. Sheds, they're designed not only for cow comfort, but for labour efficiency as well. And as we've just covered, minimise those groups pen disruptions. So in terms of how we actually manage cows and not moving them from group to group. And really helping the robot to succeed. So yes, using more than one robot feed and optimising the feed tables and the milk permission settings. So they are a crucial element, but all of those things that come before will actually mean that if we get the feed tables correct, and if we've got the milking permission, so if we've got the robot settings correct, everything then starts to hit. Went back to that one of those first slides when I was on about where we wanted to be in terms of that sweet spot. And in essence, that's what it's all around, is what the cow requires to allow her basically to express her natural potential. She's more than capable of doing it. It's, as I'm trying to illustrate, it's sometimes the barriers, the blockers we inadvertently put in place that prevent her from doing that. It's not that she doesn't want to do it, it's just that we haven't identified or removed it to allow her to just do what she's naturally capable of doing. Thank you very much for your time. I'd like to pass over now to my colleague Alison Ewan, and Alison will take us through a practical example of a customer that she's working with and just give us some more detail behind that.
Thank you, Philip. Have I got the controls?
You have got the controls, Alison.
Thank you. Sorry, there may be a slight time delay, yeah. Good evening, everybody, and thank you, Philip. I may not cover all the data and management areas that Philip has taken us through, but would like to present a story as a timeline from a dairy unit that I work with. And just to reference this image, this is Steve Annadale, one of our customers with a robotic system, alongside our colleague Clive Slawson, just in case they're watching and need to have a shout out. W. Halford and Son, Bowl Hill Farm. There's a clue in the name of the farm. It's a family farm on a compact hillside of 3 generations. 135 cows in the herd currently, 115 in milk. 70 are milked through the traditional parlour, with 45 milked through the new Fullwood robot. The team is Jane and Jeff Halford and their son Michael, plus Marjorie and Catherine in full support. Marjorie is Michael's grandma, and she's in full support for human nutrition, as well as helping move the cows in for milking in the summer. Also to mention, Catherine, Michael's older sister, recently qualified as a vet last year and now working in practice in Wales, but she provides valuable holiday cover. The images to the right-hand side are to emphasise that it's farmed on a compact hillside, yeah. And the last image here is the only field across the front which the cows have access to, which doesn't involve crossing a road. And you can see there's been a new cow track installed relatively recently. So Bowl Hill Farm comprises 87 acres, with only 8 around the farm for grazing and with roads to cross on the hill. The choice to a robot. Jane and Jeff, Michael's parents, are and have been fully supportive of giving Michael the freedom as the next generation to make some choices. Yeah. So in 2017 and early 2018, they started the research. First considerations were farm location and layout, compact hillside, restricted storage space in that, yeah, labour intensive, certainly in the summer when it takes 3 people to bring the cows in from grazing to be milked, and not least involving some danger. Flashing warning lights help, but impatient drivers don't. The team considered they very definitely wanted to keep the family team, but also wanted to consider the future sort of 10 years plus forward. The herd size was felt at about right, and the herd potential was considered high, so the move to a robot potentially could express some of that potential. Michael had also had some experience with robots while studying when he was at Reese Heath. Potential blockers, the investment was high, but recent grant schemes that Greg referenced early on became available, and broad financial numbers were worked out on gaining another 1,000 litres extra herd yield. But was this a big ask, as less than 50% of the herd would be on the robot? Feeding strategy and grazing also needed to be considered. Could the grazing be incorporated? Would this need to change? Next, if we consider the right choice to a robot. So was it the right choice? We needed to do some research. Several local farms and a few further afield were visited. Which robot to choose, which brand of robots. In these research here, there were a number of brands considered and visited, but it obviously needs to be influenced by existing dairy engineer support and relationships and regional support. The current shed layout, was it suitable for adaptation? In this case, we were considering the lower shed, so was it suitable for adaptation? The current feeding system. The current feeding system was relatively simple, as we've referenced. It's a compact hillside with very little storage, but agreed it was perfectly suitable for adaptation, certainly at the current yields then and the proposed yields coming forward. Areas to work on were highlighted in terms of potential dry cow management, yeah, and then also, was everybody comfortable with working with and understanding the data that would come at them from a robotic system? So the decision made to 1 robot unit in the lower shed. So start up here. This image top right shows you the unit and just shows you an image of a cow in the robot just to add to it. Yeah. So the lower shed was used and adapted. Previously, it had been used to house close-up dry cows and calving pens, so other buildings would need to be adapted for the dry cows, certainly the close-up dry cows. A new feed bin needed to be installed, so the parlour feed and the robot feed are on 2 separate feed bins, and the siting of the bin was confirmed, and our manufacturing and sort of logistics colleagues supported in terms of confirming where best for that siting of that bin and access to it. Yeah. Installation of the robot, the Forward Paco robot was chosen and installed in October 2018 with Mark Bailey as the dairy engineers. Then a robotic scraper and fans were also installed, and the initial setup was aimed at 50 cows on this robot, and they were selected from the 125 cows in the herd at the time, and the cows were selected initially on teat conformation and genetic potential. A new water tank and turnover water troughs were installed as well at the end of 2018, and quite important, there needed to be a new concrete ramp for access into the office, yeah, because otherwise it was a big step up. Feeding system. The feeding system was easy to adapt because it was a fairly simple system previously. It was based on big bale silage. The clamped silage, the Halfords took on the neighbour's clamp at the end of 2018. It was a 1-cut material taken in the middle of June. It was 240 tonne from 30 acres, and it probably made up 20–25% of the silage fed in this first winter. The Halfords had no control of the material in this clamp, but in that first year, but for the years since, they've managed the grass and the fertiliser and the cutting and the ensiling and the additive, etc. Our F2M rationing model and systems, which Philip's referenced in terms of OptiFeed, it starts with the accuracy of a dry NIR silage analysis to fully assess the quality of the silage. This then enabled us to ration with the best solution for the compound for the robot. We aim to keep the consistency across the simple ration and the dairy cake, but we will adjust product choice to correctly balance as we need to. If we next move to startup, December 2018, so preparation in the first days and weeks. There was obviously the on-farm team with full support. 11th of December was the first milking through the robot. On the 20th of December, the numbers will show you a great start, 2.6 visits and 38.6 litre average. Yeah? There was some mix of days in milk, but the majority were early lactation. On the 7th of January 2019, 2.9 visits and 40 litres with 49 cows. Data setup. It was a simple startup with reference to feed, as we'd been fixed from the start point through the parlour. The cows were used to getting good levels of cake through the twice a day parlour system, and with the top cows being at 9 and 10 kilo per head per day. So this was mirrored across to the robot. Now, some may think, be thinking about a robot unit, some will be scared, some may think this is scary for very early lactation and the potential of acidosis. But with the right dairy compound choice and the fact that these cows were used to it, we couldn't afford to drop their feed allocation on the move over to the robot, and it worked. The forward team were in full support, and as we say, it was simple feeding curves set up first of all just to mimic, and they were pretty fixed, to be honest, to mimic the parlour feeding. It was based on 3 kilo per milking, and 10 kilo average was allocated. The first few days and weeks were spent ensuring the cows visit the robot easily, and its sighting in the shed and visibility and lighting would have all been considered at this point. Yeah, as you will have seen from one of those previous photos, yeah, it was one robot, one rectangular space, and the Halford setup of that with the cow flow suggested that it would work very well, and it did. If we move now into the first few months after the initial setup, so from January 2019 for the few months after, the feed curves were then set up. We worked with Miriam from Forward and Carl at Bailey's and their guide and training documents for the Crystal software. Consideration was made, and Philip's referenced some of these things, made on feed rate, base mix, increase and decrease increments per day, milking speeds, wait times, feed drops in terms of grams per second, and consideration for drying off plus fresh cows and end of lactation cows. As some of you will have experienced, Team Viewer is invaluable at this start in terms of setup, so people can share screens and look at what you're doing and correct and comment accordingly. Extra post installation robot visit arranged. By tapping into my colleagues, I was able to find the next robot unit that we ought to visit. So after the initial installation and setup in March 2019, we visited Graham Holmes at Skipton. This was very valuable because the team had gone through the initial setup and getting going, and Graham's robot system, it's a forward to his ration, his feed PMR was very simple and similar, and limited outside mix, plus Graham was very positive about what he'd learned being a number of years in, and he was very happy to share his learnings. He did emphasise dry cow management to us. So the connection made with Graham, and I know he was very happy to answer Michael's queries as and when. Cows and people adapted to the robot well. I may be giving you a rose-tinted view of the first few months because I didn't live with the cows, but the feedback in our regular appointments was good. The closer dry cow yard was the next to renovate. In our appointments, they became slightly split in terms of conversations, almost split into the top yard as the parlour cows and the bottom yard as the robot, because the top yard was then going out to grazing whilst the robot cows for the first time were staying in. The fans installed here they actually needed some correction, which was discovered by Michael and corrected in July 2019 with some temperature impact. Yeah, the robot scraper, sorry, it's not in this particular image, but the robot scraper was set to run every 1 to 1.5 hours. In the spring, probably late spring of this year, the quality of the bales started to show. The clamp had run out, and the robot cows clearly showed differences in terms of the quality of the bales, varying between 38.5 kilos to 40.5 kilos. So highlighting something that Philip referenced earlier in terms of quality of forage is key, and consistency of that forage is key. By the summer in this year, we started to highlight some trickiness on drying off, certainly at the yield levels, and the step down needed to happen sooner. So Michael corrected that. You know, it was previously set at 14 days before you set down strictly to get to dry off. It needed to be extended to at least 21 days. So if I then whiz forward 2.5 years in and put to you some of our learnings. First of all, the results so far. In March 2019, the rolling yield was 9,280 litres. March of this year, 2021, the rolling yield is 10,350 litres. Butterfat and proteins, very similar. In fact, some improvement in terms of butterfat, but I think probably a number of you might recognise that in terms of this coming through this winter, and the quality of the forages have driven more butterfat. Feed rates 0.3, a heavier feed rate, but what we wouldn't have not expected that, if you like, because of this yield increase. The herd is fully costed with our dairy manager costings through Kingshay, with a forward milk prediction and forecast also set in. So seeing how the herd has moved is easy to show from the historical and the current data, alongside the Crystal software, which Michael studies and references daily, of course. Yeah, we also use benchmarking through special interest group reports for robotic herds. So the numbers here show 40% of robot cows and 60% of parlour cows, so reflect great strides made, and the robot is actually doing about 1,900 litres a day. So we did get the extra 1,000 litres that the original broad financial calculations were done on. If we consider the bottom of this table here, we're now getting over 3 milkings, but 3.4, is this giving us a different message? How does this relate to visits? Are there some adjustments we now need to make to improve the use of the robot? Are we allowing later lactation cows too much access? Is this causing us more issues on drying off? And are they in too good a condition potentially at drying off? The other things in terms of learnings were try to do the changes gradually and assess each, before moving on to the next. Forage quality is crucial, and dry cow management is crucial. The close-up dry cow yard was renovated, and the proper feed mix and the time in this yard was also concentrated on, and Translac Advance has been one key to unlock this extra potential. We moved to this in the summer of last year, 2020, because we were hitting, well, there was some pressure on some milk fevers, but we feel this has benefited the whole herd. If I just go back to referencing something Philip captured in his numbers of 55 to 60 animals per robot, this is obviously, we're considerably lower than this, but with the average yields per cow on the robot at approximately 42 kilos, then it does put that consideration into aspect, if you like. However, do we need to assess milking speed per cow next to potentially increase the number on the robot by cow selection? Still at our 2.5 years in, and just considering the next steps. So feeding strategy, brewers grains back in. To improve efficiencies, our base mix is relatively low. At certain times of year, it might be supplying us up to 15 litres, depending on the quality of the forage. And our maximum through the robot is 14 kilos a cake. And I can see Philip rolling his eyes. How do we feed the 55 litre cow plus through the robot on its own? Do we need to consider an out-of-parlour feeder? Philip would say yes. Brewers grains actually came out at Christmas because of supply at the end of last year because of lockdown and COVID and restrictions and us not drinking enough beer. So the cows seem to manage okay on it, but we now feel they're missing that extra intake, hence, and impact on dry matter intake, hence putting it back in. Do we push the feed max above 14 kilos, risk acidosis? Have they got the time to eat it? Propylene glycol, the robot was installed with the potential of liquid supply, and liquid is fed and was started from last year with 100 millilitres per cow for the first 3 weeks. Do we need to consider at a different stage that we put some extra impact around bulling? Or do we increase the density of outside mix? We're constrained, we can't do that. We haven't got enough storage space for ingredients, yeah. What we do know is we need to continue to make excellent silage and continue to work with Edda Health. There's been some changes made with Jim's advice on head rail move recently, bed scrape more frequently, paracetic acid checks that Michael's done, and thinking about the mastitis causes. They don't seem to be coming from the dry period, so we've done full ration mineralization checks. But Philip's also just reminded us that other health and mastitis can be influenced by milking speed. So should we look at milking speed, milking frequency, and cross-reference the mastitis cows on the robot against their milking speed? So this has been our timeline so far and our story so far. So just to conclude, oh, my slide has now just stalled, bear with me. Most importantly, thank you to Jane, Jeff and Michael for allowing me to present their story. They're a great farming family who work well together and are good at what they do, certainly given the constraints of the compact hillside, yeah. Some of the photos here were taken on bringing the parlour cows in from grazing, and 2 weeks ago, Jeff commented that the robot cows were also so laid back and relaxed, unlike the parlour cows that were always anxious to get to the next place, i.e. into the parlour. With reference to the robot, the cows and the team had the potential and they've made it work, and currently enjoy the flexibility of both the parlour and the robot, as cows can move around even though the workload remains high. It's just a different focus of workload with reference to the robot. As the next generation to the farm, Michael has made the decisions for part of its future and worked hard to learn the new robotic system and make it successful, and the cows have responded well to this change. But the family are still conscious of the consumer message of wanting cows out to pasture, and how do we marry this up with the challenges here of getting cows out to grass? Anyway, still, probably for Michael and I more than Jeff and Jane, we'd love just 1 or 2 more robots, maybe just the one, to be able to express the cow's potential across the whole herd. Thank you very much. I'll pass back to you, Greg.
Thank you, Alison. I'll just take control back. So yeah, thank you very much. Some cracking insight there, and a very good example of having the right team around you, I think. And you've been very open and honest and shared some good lessons that have been learned that have now been shared with other people. So we thank you for that, and most definitely echo your thanks to the Halford family for letting us share their story. Now, I am conscious of time and don't want to hold everybody up. So we have had a few questions come through, and there will be a commitment from myself to come back to those questions and respond to you on a direct basis. But for the sake of time this evening, I'll just run through and conclude the last couple of slides. Okay, so we've heard from Philip earlier in the webinar about the key drivers in robot efficiency, and we've just seen in practice from Alison how focusing on those parameters can firstly ensure a smooth transition into robotics, but secondly, how they can drive improvement in herd productivity and how that can happen quite quickly. Our focus at ForFarmers is on getting the basics right, and that really is delivering solid nutritional advice and good robotic guidance to help you meet the aspirations you have for your herd and for your business. And that's really highlighted by the building blocks of our robot triangle that you can see on the screen. The 3 areas we focus on are the importance of getting the feed and health right of the herd, of understanding the robot settings and making sure that they work for you, and getting the management of the cow and the system right as well, which I hope you've seen through this evening's webinar. But most notably in that management section, it's about getting the smoothest of transitions between dry and milking cows, allowing the cows to hit the ground running as they enter the robot. Now, earlier in the webinar, you were kind enough to tell us a bit about yourselves, and I'm just going to take a minute or so here to give you some insight into what we're doing at ForFarmers. So we've a team now, a national team of experienced robot specialists, and they're on hand to support our teams on the ground, but more importantly, you and your business as well, whether you're just starting to consider robots or whether you've been milking through robots for many years. So to date, internationally, we've guided 500 people through robotic setups, and we now provide feed and support to over 1,700 robotic farms across the countries that we operate in. Now, through that journey, we've learned quite a bit at each stage, and we also understand that each stage of robotic milking comes with a different requirement. So we have a range of tools and courses and in-depth knowledge through our teams to help you and your business wherever you may need it. So whether that be leaning on our network of robotic farms like Alison did with the Halford family earlier on, or whether you're looking to use our analysis tools to truly maximize the output of your robotic system, then we're here to help. So please do reach out. Please do reach out to your local ruminant or robot specialist. They'd be more than willing and happy to come and understand your farm, your aspirations, and help identify ways to make efficiency and profitability progress on your farm. That's us for this evening. You'll see here some links to our social media outlets and channels, and also an email address if you do have any further questions. Like I say, we'll most definitely make note of the questions that we've had through this evening, and we will come back directly to you. So with that, we wish you well for the evening, and we'll see you all very, very soon.